Hi, folks. Welcome to Peace at Home Parenting. I'm Ruth Freeman, licensed clinical social worker and founder of Peace at Home Parenting. I'm delighted to be here today talking about parenting LGBTQ plus children. And we're going to talk about what each of those letters mean, plus a few other letters, I think. And I'm going to ask our wonderful guests today to introduce themselves. I think you're going to find this conversation very helpful, and this conversation is going to be built on your questions and comments. So please, you can start those questions anytime once you're here. Colleen, will you start and tell us who you are?
Hi, my name is Colleen Vesley, and I'm a faculty member at George Mason University in Virginia, and I'm in the early childhood education program as well as the Human Development and Family Science program. But what really brings me to the conversation today is that I have 3 children, and my middle child, who's 8 years old, describes herself as gender expansive. And what that means to her and to us and our family is that she identifies as a girl, and she expresses in ways that are very expansive in terms of gender. So in terms of how she looks, her hair is very short, and she wears clothes that others might see as more masculine. And the activities she engages in, others might see as more feminine. She likes Barbies, for example, and she's always making little trinkets for them. So, and I am here to really learn as much as just share what our experience has been.
Thanks, Colleen. Barbara?
Hi, I'm Barbara.
I'm hoping that Pam, our tech support person, will communicate with us. You should probably mute right now, Barbara. Maybe go in and out again. And we don't have Facebook open, Barbara. Make sure that you don't have Facebook open on your computer. Oh, that's interesting. And maybe try going in and out. Pashi, tell us who you are.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pashi Walker. My pronouns are Zers, or you can use my first name. I do LGBTQ advocacy work in my day job, and also have done much research and worked with youth, LGBTQ youth. I also am the parent of 3 kids, all of whom identify along the LGBTQ spectrum, including my middle one, who came out at 12 and a half, first as lesbian, now identifies as bisexual and genderqueer and uses the pronouns they, them. And my youngest son is gay and came out at 15. I think that's it. Oh, I've done a lot of coaching for parents whose kids are coming out.
Thank you. I think, did you say that you worked on parenting classes with parents? You've done some classes with parents. Do I remember that from our conversation, Pashi?
Yes, I have done some trainings, and I've done a lot of one-on-one coaching.
Great, thank you. Barbara, can we try again?
How is that?
Sounds really scary, Barbara.
I don't know why that is. Nothing else is.
We're going to keep going, and hopefully Pam can work with you to talk about that. Barbara is a psychologist that works with adults who have HIV and who, as adults, are still processing some of the losses they had as kids when they didn't get the kind of support that we're going to talk about today. I want to start, Pashi, just by asking you to define LGBTQ plus, all those letters.
Absolutely. So first of all, just know that LGBTQ doesn't encompass every single identity. There's many, many identities, but the letters themselves, L stands for lesbian, G stands for gay, B stands for bisexual, though many of you out there may have heard the terms pansexual or sexually fluid. T stands for transgender. Q stands for queer or questioning. It does double duty. The plus is because there's many other letters to add to that, including 2S for two-spirit, A for asexual, I for intersex. And just remember, there's a spectrum and there's many, many, many identities.
So, Pashi, when you think about a first message for parents, when you think about, like, if you can leave parents with one message to begin with, what do you think is the most important behavior or strategy that parents can use if their children are expressing anything about this, either, and I want to clarify, those letters all sort of add up to either their gender identity or their sexual orientation. Is that right? All those letters come under one of those categories?
They do. And then there's something called gender expression. And sexual orientation and gender identity are two very different things. And gender expression often is what's used when people say they have gaydar, that they can tell someone is lesbian or gay. What they're actually reading is someone's gender expression.
Can you explain what is gender expression?
So gender expression is how you either choose to express yourself. So if you are assigned female at birth, but you feel maybe like you enjoy dressing more masculine, that's a way of gender expression. But also, if you were assigned female at birth and you identify as a woman, and so you like dressing up in dresses and high heels and makeup, that's also gender expression. We all have a sexual orientation. We all have a gender identity, and we all have gender expression. And gender expression is something we might perform in various ways, either because we're at work or to please our parents or because the school tells us to. So it's not always a choice as much as sometimes what we're being forced to do. It depends.
And if there's a first message for parents that you would want to give folks, what is that? What's the basic first most important message you want to share with parents?
I would say the first thing is to remember that this is the child you have always loved. There is nothing different about this child, no matter what they're telling you about their sexual orientation or their gender identity or how they're choosing, or I wouldn't say choosing, how they are expressing themselves at the moment. That is still the child that you have loved from the moment that they came into this world.
I don't know why that makes me a little teary. So, Colleen, can you talk a little bit about how your daughter's expression about herself affected you at first when she first started to? First of all, she's so young. How'd she come up with the word expansive? It's such a big word.
So that probably came from me and some of the reading that I do both in my professional life and because of the ways in which I saw her expressing. And she was 2 when she first started saying, I don't want to wear dresses. I don't like flowers. I want to wear Luca's clothes. So that's her older brother. So she's bookended by brothers. And so, you know, I work in the early childhood field. I work in family science. And so to me, it was natural to follow her lead. And so that is the advice that I would give, which I think aligns with what Pashi's saying, is I followed her lead. She wanted to wear her brother's bathing suit instead of a girl bathing suit. Okay. You know, and so to me, when kiddos are little, it's really, if we're thinking about transitioning and things like this, it's a social transition. And I was trying to understand for a long time, as she was, how she wanted people to call her in terms of her pronouns, right? And that was a lot for, you know, and then we're moving into she's 3 and 4. And so initially it was really around clothing. And when she was 5, she asked to cut her hair. So we cut her hair. And then I actually was like, wow, I love your short hair. I'm going to cut mine. It was so easy. So that, you know, that just gives you a little bit. I don't want to go on and on.
Well, I mean, what I like about Colleen's story is Colleen's willingness to listen really carefully and help her have words for what she's feeling, and also allowing her young daughter to influence her. And I think this is a challenge for a lot of parents, is to let them teach us. We think that's upside down. But before we go on, I just want to see Barbara. Let's check your sound and see if you can introduce yourself.
I hope it's better this time. Is that better?
Much better.
Okay, good. Yay. It's good to be back. I'm Barbara Duarte Scalato. I'm a licensed psychologist, and I work with many LGBTQ youths. I have two daughters myself. One who is her sexual orientation is she is a female, and she identifies as a female, and she's almost 21. The other one is 14, and I think that's undefined at this point. So, and I have a background in developmental psychology, so as well. So, and I've worked with children and with families. So it's really great to be here.
And Barbara, you had said earlier that you work with adults. Part of the population you serve are adults who have HIV, and you work with adults who identify as LGBTQ and who did not necessarily have optimal support as they were growing up, and then end up still dealing with it as adults. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, it's it's really, really painful, and sometimes I still will work with people as old as 60. Who maybe they've even come back to back home to take care of their elderly parents, and sometimes their parents slip them a little remark, and they're just right back there. They feel very hurt. They very much want to be accepted now, but I think many of them suffer from not having been accepted, not having been loved as much, because somehow their sexual orientation got in the way of that. And what I see a lot too, when it extends out of the family to the social world, right, to school and peers, one of the things that they seem to really have missed is knowing that their parents were there as allies for them, especially when they got bullied. And I have many, many men, in particular gay men, who were bullied as children because they did begin to demonstrate and express themselves in ways that a lot of people were uncomfortable with. And as a consequence, were bullied, were abused in social settings, and didn't feel able to go back to their parents and tell them. Or if they did tell their parents, they didn't feel like their parents could be there, could serve as allies for them.
So let's talk about, first of all, let's talk about specific actions parents do that are those actions of being an ally to your child. Let's talk about very concrete things parents can do that will help their child feel like they are an ally. And can we define that word ally somehow? Anybody?
Do you want me to do
Go ahead.
Somebody who stands with. You stand with. You're there. You don't always do all the work. Sometimes it's a modal position. So sometimes you may be at the forefront, in front. Sometimes you may be at the back. Sometimes you're just alongside. But you're there. So if your child is walking down the street and somebody might say something to them, you check in with your child, and you ask your child, did you hear that? And you begin a dialogue, because children don't often feel comfortable enough to begin to ask those questions. But if you've heard it, it's very clear that they've heard it as well. So how are you going to open up that conversation? And, this changes developmentally. Obviously, your child, the older they get, the older they may want you to be there in different sorts of ways. But what's really important is that you check in with them and that you ask them, how do you want me to be here for you? What is it that you need?
And sometimes with younger children, we can make some suggestions. If they can't come up with something with younger kids, we can say, would this be helpful? Or Colleen, do you have some thoughts about that and some specific strategies of supporting kids?
So one of the things we talk about in our house are the old rules of gender and the new rules of gender. And I learned that from actually a childhood friend of mine whose child is transgender. And she's also a professor as well. And she learned that from a very smart therapist, she would say. And so we use that language, and that the new rules are that you can live in your body however you want to live in your body. And my child has taken that beyond our family. So she shares that with others, and I hope feels the support from us as her family and as her parents. And I think she does, because she now goes out and advocates for other kiddos. to help them express and live how they want to live. And I would say the second thing that we do is we have a range of books in which my child can see herself. And she brings those books to school. And I always am curious how teachers receive those books. Remember, I'm in early childhood. And so I actually train early childhood educators. And I have been so pleased with just how open teachers have been and the children as well. And so I remember there's a book called A House for Everyone, and there's a lot of language in there that helps define a variety of terms that Pashi just went through. And my daughter was able to point out to her classmates that one of the children in there, Ivy, is just like her. And her teacher had the perfect response. And she just said, I love it too when there are characters in books that are just like me. And so I think books are, especially for little ones, are an amazing way to begin these conversations.
Yeah, and for those of us who aren't so comfortable talking about all this, books are incredibly helpful. Pashi, can you talk a little bit about specific strategies that parents can use to support their kids? What makes them an ally, very concretely?
So first of all, I want to give everyone a resource, and you can easily Google this, the Family Acceptance Project. And they have booklets that you can download in multiple languages. They also have some posters, and there's both the behaviors that will increase your child's health and well-being, and ones that don't. So since we're talking about what's supportive, the first thing that may seem really obvious, but people forget to do, tell your LGBTQ or gender diverse child that you love them. Make sure you show affection to your child when they tell you or when you learn that your child is LGBT or Q. Make sure that you ask your child if and how you can help them tell other people about their LGBTQ identity, which means that you're going to allow them to talk about it. Even if you are uncomfortable or think that being gay or transgender is wrong, I'm not asking you to change how you believe, although that would be great. You don't have to do that to have these behaviors, to support your child. If you're religious, find a congregation that welcomes your LGBTQ or gender diverse child and your family, because having them hear, even if it's not from your lips, having them hear from your minister, preacher, etc., that what they are is a sin, can be very detrimental. You want more? There's like so many.
One more. Tell us one more and we'll come back.
I'll tell you one more. Here's one. If you don't have any already, but try and find some LGBTQ role models for your child, or take them to support groups or to an LGBTQ center or event where they have the opportunity to see positive role models of people who are living their lives happily and with joy.
Thank you. I think about this in terms of when my husband was teaching my daughter about managing finances, and I'm really terrible at it. I was also a learner during that time. Like, I was learning alongside of her. And I think that for many of us, this requires, and Colleen, you probably, even though this is your field, you still had to learn about this with much more specificity. I think that we have to just be willing to be learners alongside our children. One thing I just wanted to say out loud at the very least, and hear any comments that you have, is that I think that for many parents, when children start to talk about being different in any of these ways, for many of us, it's disconcerting, it's unnerving, and we feel scared. I think I have to say, I've had clients who go through this process, so I've been right next to people going through this process, and for me, it feels like I would be worried that my child's life is going to be harder. If they're going to be different, it's going to be harder, and I would have trouble. I think for me personally, I would have to go through some form of a grieving process that the child wasn't going to be who I dreamed. Now, I think parents have to do this all the time with kids in many different ways. And for example, my daughter, I always thought she was going to become a great reader. She's super smart, and she never loved to read the way I did, and we didn't get to share books, and I had a whole fantasy of what was going to happen. And those are like little micro versions of that, although I still hold out that I think she's going to start reading when she gets older. But anyway, and that is the thing. It's having these ideas of what our kids are going to be like. So can you all talk a little bit about, how parents can navigate being supportive, showing I love you, accepting to the degree they're ready to accept, and we can talk a little bit about that specifically, but also maybe grieving at the same time and not trying to suppress that either, but how they navigate all that. Any thoughts about that? Just unmute yourself when you think of it.
So I work with parents all the time on this issue. And I would say, first of all, yes, you have and need to grieve what you thought, what you expected your child to be. But that grieving and that working through has to be done separate from your child. Please do not communicate your grief to your child, because what this is about is the expectations you had. And I want to point out to you that even if your child were straight and cisgender meaning that they identify with the sex they were assigned with at birth, that it doesn't mean that everything you dreamed for them would still be. It doesn't mean they would get married. Doesn't mean they would have children. And it doesn't mean that they wouldn't have a hard life. I'm only 5 feet tall. Let me tell you, that was not an easy thing to go through life, being 5 feet tall. So, not everybody gets to have an easy life about every single thing about who they are. And so these are just your dreams and expectations. They're not real. And so go ahead and feel them and work on them, but do that separate from your kid.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I would 100% echo that. And I would say, I guess this is the professor in me, read. You need to educate yourself, and you need to continue to educate yourself. And this is, as I teach to my family science students, what I tell them is this is one of the most exciting areas of the family, because we're continuing to learn how do we best support children, individuals in the family who are LGBTQ plus. And so that's what I would say too, is to educate and actually really look at the special gift you have in this child. In a documentary, there was a father who described his transgender child as a unicorn, and as just like such a gift, and in this positive way. And that is how I see my daughter. She has taught me so much.
Yeah, thank you. We talked a little bit about bullying, and I think that LGBTQ kids are especially at risk of being bullied, although there are other groups of kids that fall into that category as well. Do you all have any comments or suggestions for parents, first of all, to determine whether their kids are being bullied? And second of all, what action steps to take if they discover that they are? Because I think some kids hide it. Any thoughts about that? And I mean, I'll share with you in general that what we tell parents about bullying generally is to talk with kids first and encourage them to speak up and to communicate directly to the bully to stop and practice that together, what that looks like. Also, to talk with kids about having close friends. And kids who have one or two close friends are less likely to be bullied in general, but also having your own little tribe that's with you can help a lot when you're being bullied. And finally, to engage schools very actively and to expect schools to not only talk to the bully, but to create programs for whole groups of kids so that as a group they can address the bullying, because often the bully is as much of a victim as the kid being bullied because of where that bullying typically comes from. Any other thoughts about that, or ideas in relation to these kids being bullied?
Yeah, I really like everything you said, Ruth. I think it's they're all great ideas. I would add that sometimes we always want our kids to have a couple of cronies at school. And but if they can't because the environment is a little bit too hot there, I think it's really important that we find other worlds in which our children can really thrive. So, a child might not necessarily be popular at school, might be bullied at school, but maybe there is a theater group, or a sports group, or, some other group outside where they can really flourish and begin to have friends and allies there. I do have a lot of patients who, manifested other talents, and were not able to really exercise those talents, often artistic ones. And I do have a question for other folks too. I want to open this up because especially as a developmental psychologist, there's so many wonderful developmental milestones, that kids go through. And, it is a very, heteronormative world. And, I have adult patients who for the first time are kind of, sitting on the bleachers kind of together, nudging each other, kind of whistling at the guys going by because they've never been able to do that. There's very little social opportunities for kids who aren't heterosexual. So so I'm wondering if you folks have any ideas about how we can expand those wonderful worlds for our children, who need them just as much as they need school and as much as they need family.
Well, I mean, one of the things I was reading about as I was preparing for this session is how many kids in this community get their social connections online. And because it isn't so easy to do it exactly in your community. And at the same time, it puts them more at risk, and parents really need to be careful and supportive of kids and monitoring what those look like. But they can also be lifesavers for kids to reach out and make very real connections. And we have to kind of respect that. Pashi, did you have any thoughts about that question?
Yeah, actually, so what we found during COVID was very interesting. The LGBTQ centers all reported that their support groups all went online, and their support groups all increased except for the youth. And they decreased for the youth. That in reality, youth need, and you would know this developmentally, this is their time, especially transition age youth. So starting, 12 to 17 or whatever, 18, where they need to be with their peers in person, not just online. And so I would say that one thing that's very helpful is having a group at school. Some call them GSAs. It used to stand for Gay Straight Alliance. Now it stands for Gender and Sexuality Alliance or something. But there's actually research to show that schools where there is a GSA or a group like that, some kind of LGBTQ affirming group, that there's less bullying and harassment. And
they also see grades among LGBTQ kids go up when there's a GS Alliance.
And then to answer, I will also tell you, having had 2 kids go through school, it's impossible. It's very, very hard for them to date. There aren't enough out kids in high school. And so that's something that parents just need to be understanding about. Things are maybe hopefully getting better, but that when they go off to college, things will open up. I will say that if your child is being bullied, though, understand that bullying doesn't just come from students. And this is where parents really, really need to be on the ball. Don't ever say to your kid anything like, if you just wouldn't dress that way or talk that way or tell people this or that, then this wouldn't be happening to you. And you have to be your child's advocate. We actually put my son in a different school district after what we went through with my middle child. Unfortunately, that was the best solution. So I answered hopefully all the questions.
Well, I just want to remind us all that the brain changes in kids is what triggers adolescence, and it starts at 12 years old. It's not puberty, it's not hormones, it's brain changes. And it begins at 12 years old and goes all the way to 24. And some of the things that are happening in the adolescent brain is that the brain is telling them do things that feel good more than it ever will before or after adolescence. The brain is telling them that their life depends on creating a tribe of peers. And in fact, Dan Siegel, my favorite parenting educator and neuroscientist, says that, that tribe really is very much hooked up with survival, because you need a tribe or you need a group of close friends in order to launch. Kids have a much harder time becoming independent and becoming adults without that group of peers. So they feel like their life depends on these social relationships, and parents sometimes minimize that or don't understand the intensity, but it's a biological necessity. They're being driven, but they're also being driven to do things that are a little risky and new and novelty, and they need to do all this, but they need to do it with peers. And if they don't have those peers, their development is really affected, and we're more likely to see the depression and anxiety and mental health issues that are associated with that isolation during adolescence. Colleen, were you about to say something? I thought you were thinking something.
Yeah, so I am looking at somebody's comment about being a coach, and so I just wanted to share a little bit about some of our experiences in kind of navigating sports, because I do think it's been tricky. And so my daughter, she swims, she runs track. For some time she did Taekwondo, and I would actually say the Taekwondo studio was like the place that she was very comfortable. I, as a parent, was very comfortable because everybody wears the same thing, and it depends on what belt you are, right? And your name, at least at their studio, is written in Korean, and so. But it's been challenging because sports split almost immediately at like 5 years old, boy, girl, and so track and swimming, while their placing and how they compete is girls and boys, they all swim together. But we recently have run into a challenge with swimsuits. She has never worn, the typical kind of girl swimsuit, and quite frankly, as a mother, why would I encourage my child to wear something like, uncomfortable like that? Anyways, and so there's a lot of rules, like from USA Swimming, right, which is what our swim team follows. And so literally yesterday, my daughter was in tears in the car because what she thought she could wear, we found out she couldn't wear. And so we're trying to go through all kinds of things. And the thing I would say is, in sports, is finding those advocates that are allies to your child, to you as a parent. And so we are lucky that we have a swim team rep who is like going to bat for us. And we've had people in those spaces. So my daughter's track coach, same thing, is always keeping an ear open in case there are kids misgendering her. She corrects, but that is like exhausting for an 8-year-old. It's exhausting probably for an 80-year-old to have to correct about who you are. And so I would say those kinds of things for coaches to really connect with that child, have a sense of who they are, and really listening. And when you hear something, correcting in whatever way that child has told you is okay. It could be in private, or the child, like my daughter, would be totally fine with the coach correcting in front of everyone and saying, just correcting the pronouns. So I think that's really important. And I would say, as a parent, when you are somebody who works with children, it's your job to know pronouns. It's your job to know what children prefer. And so that's I get you can tell I have energy around this. That's a space in which I get a lot of energy, because it can be constant microaggressions for kids. It doesn't need to be.
This is interesting for me because this is kind of another angle on this, and when my daughter was in kindergarten, she came home and she said that, in kindergarten, if you cry, you have to sit in the crying chair. And as a therapist, I was like, oh my God, that's horrible. And I didn't say these things, but in my mind, I was like, oh my God, what are they trying to do? Get them not to express their feelings and blah, blah, all this. And I had all my feelings. But what I said to her was, because my position was always to start with her perception of things and her understanding of things. Because I think we often assume things. Like I thought, oh, that poor kid, and she's in this repressive environment. And, it was distressing to me. Partly because I grew up in a family where you weren't supposed to express your feelings and a whole culture where you weren't supposed to express your feelings. So I felt like this was a serious transgression. But when I said to her, so what are you going to do about that? And she said, oh, I'm not going to cry in kindergarten. And and there was a part of me that was like, oh, okay, she solved that problem. That probably isn't terrible. And I just said to her, well, let me know how that goes. And if you have any trouble with that, let me know, and so forth. And I'm telling this story because on one hand, I'm totally with you, Colleen, and I'm saying, she has an identity and she wants to wear a certain bathing suit and she doesn't want to wear those stupid, uncomfortable ones that we've been wearing all our lives. And on the other hand, she's out in the world and she's having a challenge. And on one hand, you're advocating for her and you're asking for support. On the other hand, she may have to deal with situations that are less than ideal in terms of accepting her identity. So in my mind, and you all can correct me, there's a fine line of advocating for them, but also stepping back and letting them solve problems in a way that is more conforming to what society is going to ask of them. And I don't think it's either or. Do you have any thoughts about this? I mean, this is what was coming up as you were talking, Colleen.
So can I just say one thing in terms of this? So we talked about short term and long term. So in the short term, let's figure out because her language was, I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel like myself. And we talked through it. And so we've come up with a compromise that we think will work in conversation with the rep, and she's in conversation with the league and everything. And then we talked about long-term things. And Ruth, my daughter, she's 8 years old and already a fierce advocate for everyone. And so we talked about, she's not the only child who may feel uncomfortable in those swimsuits, right? That when we think about systems and we think about society, that actually there are going to be hurdles, but some of those things need to start bending towards how society is. And so we do letter writing. We've written letters to all kinds. And so I actually think she's probably going to write a letter to the swim league, and I think that's an important exercise to know that she has a voice, and that you don't just need to accord, because I actually think that's the messaging that kids who, in my daughter's case, who are gender expansive get all the time. And so I am here to say, no, let's see what we can do. Let's see how we can work this out in the short term, because you really want to swim, because you always have a choice. You don't have to swim, but she really wants to swim. And so let's figure out what works. But let's also do something where we can take this energy and we can advocate, not just for you, but maybe for other kids. So
Great. And your daughter really is a passionate ally. Any other thoughts about this? Because we have a parent question that I want to address. Anything else you want to add to this conversation, Pashi or Barbara?
Well, I just wanted to say that I think, there's a book I remember once we were assigned when one of my kids was really young. I don't think I ever read the book, but I always remember the title. Farber wrote it. I think it's Talk So That Your Children Will Listen, Listen So Your Children Will Talk. And I think that title has always stuck with me. So, and I think that's really important, to create a really comfortable environment that, you just listen, you observe, no judgment. I mean, that's the environment that I create as a therapist, but there's a lot of similarities to being a therapist and being a parent, and a therapeutic parent, I guess. And I think that does change as children get older. Now, my children didn't have to negotiate sexual orientation when they were little, but they are adopted. They are Chinese, and they have a Caucasian mother and a single parent. So there were plenty of questions abound, that were very uncomfortable and some downright mean. and rude, and assumptions that were made. So when they were younger, a lot of, when your kids are coming home with things and, at 2 or 3 or 4, you're going to respond a little bit differently. You're just going to go in there and you're going to, do a lot of heavy lifting, right? And you can prepare some of the, classrooms by providing books. And every year we would have books about different sorts of families, and educate kids and classroom climates. But as they get older, they don't want their parents coming in and doing that. Right. So as my children would get older, I would ask them, how do you want to handle this?
So
And they would tell me. Sometimes they would say, you know what, like, let me try, and then if it doesn't work, maybe you can come in or whatever. And, I would let them set the pace. And that kind of shifts, at least for my children. And one is very verbal. One is a little bit more reserved and is not as expressive. So that was a little bit harder. So I think you also have to think about your child's style. Different children are just different. They communicate differently. They express their feelings differently, and you have to take that into account too. And they would want to deal with things very differently as well.
Right. They'll teach us what they need if we allow them. So we have a really excellent question. How can we best raise our kids to be allies or create an accepting environment at a young age? This comes from a mom who I know has an 18-month-old or 20-month-old and almost 5-year-old. So thinking about children from birth to 5, when these conversations happen in all different ways, because they're exploring all this and they're interested in this. This is actually my daughter asking this question, and she described, and my daughter's a passionate ally, and she described her daughter coming home from preschool and saying boys are stronger than girls. And my daughter was like, "What? No!" And I was like, "But aren't men actually built stronger than women? I mean, is that a biological fact?" And we were kind of having this conversation. So that's an example of the complication of how do we create environments. And I'm going to ask you guys to be you folks, I shouldn't say guys, I'm going to ask you folks to be very specific. What can parents of young children do in their day-to-day interactions, in their conversation? One thing no, she said no. One thing, I don't know what that's no to, but she's always correcting me, so we'll have a great conversation here. But one thing I want to say is that you really want to pay attention to any kind of jokes about gender or sexual orientation, and just not allow them in your environment. That's one way to do it. Women are way stronger. So, and she did beat out her best friend in preschool in pull-ups, and he was a boy. So I'll say, any other very practical strategies for parents of young children? Pasha,
Go ahead, Pasha.
Okay. So first of all, I want to say that degenderizing the way that you talk about things. And by the way, there are boys that are stronger than certain girls, and there are girls that are stronger than certain boys. And it is not inherent to any gender, but also, first of all, there are a ton of picture books now that are lovely, that normalize both same-sex attraction and also gender expansiveness. And so I would say that mixing those books in along with any other picture books, and when you talk about people, when you don't make assumptions that your own children are cisgender and straight. They might not be. So while you're working on creating allies, what you may not realize is you're creating an environment that will allow them to be whoever they want to be and whoever they are. And so just so you know, when I was raising my children, I was not out to myself or anyone else. So I still wanted to raise my kids to be allies. And I worked very hard to talk about how it was okay to love whoever you wanted to love. It was okay to be whatever you want to be. I grew up in an age where I wasn't allowed to play the drums because I was a girl. I wasn't allowed to take shop because I was a girl. And boys weren't allowed to play the flute or take home ec. So that would be the thing I would do with young kids, and be really careful, and also make sure that the teachers, when they go to preschool and school, is to ask them to please not divide the children up by boys and girls. Divide them up by birth month. Divide them up by the color of shirt they're wearing, any other way than by gender. And that would go a long way to helping to normalize that not everything is black and white, not everything is binary, and just to remember and be curious. When you talk to your own child, don't say things like, someday, honey, all the boys are going to love you, when you're talking to a girl, or someday you're going to grow up and marry a beautiful woman, and have children. I mean, just if you paint these future pictures, the messages you're sending them is that's the only acceptable future for them to have. And if they want something different, they're going to be afraid to tell you. Even if they come home and they like somebody, don't jump to, do you have any girlfriends? Do you have any boyfriends? I can't tell you how many people will ask a 5-year-old that even. It already is setting up that heterocentric, heterosexist, that it's only okay to be heterosexual kind of model. And I'll let Barbara go now.
Barbara, isn't there a developmental stage? Like my granddaughter now is 4, and she's really got this boy-girl thing, and she's kind of talking about what girls are and what boys are. Is that a typical developmental stage, or is that really, and Colleen, you may have some information about this, is that socially determined, or is that what happens in our identity development? Is the gender question come up around 4 and 5, or is that related to our society? Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Well, I would say that I think sometimes children begin to carve out differences just intellectually. They're beginning to conceptually, notice differences. They often notice difference in shapes and difference in colors and things like that. But I think a lot of it is determined by is socially constructed. So, and in general, the research that I've read, it's actually children who are a little bit more fluid actually tend to be happier in the long run anyway. So, my children are pretty, they're just happy and fluid, and, they had their own obstacles to overcome early on. But, there was never this kind of, they didn't grow up kind of in a binary sort of way. They were told very early on that, that they would be accepted, that they are accepted and loved no matter what, and they're loved, and they will be encouraged to be who they are and their best versions of themselves. And that includes choosing whomever they want to love. So I think part of that is creating an environment for that. But in terms of, I also want to say, I just want to go back to the bullying, because I have so many patients, it just sticks with me, that are suffer. And one thing we know about bullying is that it has incredibly lingering effects. It is really devastating. So it just lasts. So I actually, we had a bully in one of my daughter's classes, and for different reasons, and we invited him over for a play date. And very, you sometimes, once you have a play date a couple of times with somebody, you're probably not going to bully them. So that's just a specific example that I can remember. But I think, allies can be created, again, by school environments, by peers, by teachers. I can't tell you how many patients I had whose teachers, I don't even know how people got away with this. Totally humiliated, shamed, ridiculed children, to the point of, I have patients of mine who felt that if they opened their mouth in their classrooms, that immediately something bad would happen, either from the teacher or from the peers. It's really, I work with most people, and I have to work with them as having experienced trauma because of this. So I think, we really have to work very, very hard at creating accepting, loving, supportive environments for people to thrive, for our children to thrive.
Absolutely. Colleen, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, from a real practical standpoint, I'll just tell you from personal experience that when my daughter received the most questions was in 1st grade. And thankfully, she had the most magnificent teacher who helped children ask respectful questions, worked with my daughter to answer those questions, folded in important books, like many of the books that my child would bring into school. And then I would echo what Pashi said too, is the splitting. It sounds so simple. Girls go get your lunches, boys go get your lunches. This happened in kindergarten to my daughter. Girls go get your lunches. It's first day of school. My daughter goes to get her lunch. You're not a girl. She said girls. Luckily, my daughter is very outspoken, but there are many children who are not. And what if you don't identify as a girl or a boy? What if you are questioning? And there are children who are questioning very early. And so, which I believe my daughter was at that time. And for right now, she identifies as a girl, maybe because she thinks she needs to say, yes, I'm a girl, because we are so still binary. And then the last thing I would say, going back to what I said in the very beginning, is truly following your child's lead. And I think that this really goes to, if your child is assigned male at birth and wants to wear dresses, let them wear dresses. Like, it really, my youngest identifies as a male right now, I think. He's 4.5 and he loves to wear dresses. And we have a couple still hanging around that people had given us that my daughter doesn't want to wear. So we do. I mean, it's not, and in our household, it's not a big deal, but I do know in other households it is. And so following your kid's lead.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I just want to say that I'm going to ask all of you either during our conversation or afterwards to send us some sources of lists of books by age, so that we can put them on our private Facebook group and we can share with folks just some specific books or even just sources of good books, without having to list all the books. Pashi, did you have something you wanted to add? We're going to wrap up in just a couple of minutes.
Just really quickly to piggyback, I just want to say that I was reading a book about gender expansive children and with some great quotes. And one of them was, why is it that boys can't have a vagina? Why is it that girls can't have a penis? So that when you're talking about being gender expansive, gender creative, and this idea that the idea that why can't I identify as a boy but enjoy wearing dresses? I mean, for goodness sake, for those of us who are assigned female at birth, or those of us who identify as women, do we not enjoy wearing pants? Aren't we glad we can do that now? Why is it we don't let men wear skirts when it's hot outside? So some of this is very much, a socially constructed, sexist, patriarchal, all of those lovely words that are driving these gender requirements. I did want to say something to parents, because we talked about behaviors they should do. Oftentimes parents, out of love, out of wanting to protect their child, and also because of the pressure maybe they're getting from others, or their own fear of what will happen, will do things with their child or say things to their child that are very, very harmful. Again, I want to send you the Family Acceptance Project, but research shows that saying things like, just don't tell the rest of the family you're gay, or you can be gay, but you can't have any gay friends over, or you are not allowed to go to any LGBTQ events. All these types of things are as traumatizing as hitting them for being LGBTQ. And what they found is that children who have higher amounts of rejecting behaviors, and that's what these are called, from their parents or guardians, are 8.5 times more likely to attempt suicide than children or youth from lower rejecting homes. So remember, I'm saying lower rejecting, not the affirming. So I can't tell you all the things right now, but just to say, if you want your child to live, to not be depressed, anxious, have suicidal thoughts, get into drugs and alcohol, do risky behaviors that will expose them to HIV and STDs, it's really important to educate yourself. You don't have to change your beliefs, but you do need to change your behavior more than anything else, so that this child grows up feeling affirmed and not rejected.
Thank you, Pashi. Well said. But as I was thinking about this session, I read that coming out is a lifelong journey of understanding, acknowledging, and sharing one's, and this is gender identity and or sexual orientation with others. And I was fascinated to see it as a lifelong process. But I think that for all of us, it's a lifelong process of knowing who we are for all of us. It's just that gender identity and sexual orientation has a little more pizzazz and a little more distress in our culture. But I think that we really want to recognize that identity is a lifelong process, and be open to this process with our kids, and be open to learning and processing our own emotions of distress with peers, with therapists, with faith leaders, and communicating to our kids those basic messages of acceptance, curiosity about them as they grow, and support, and messages of love and acceptance, I think, is the bottom line, even though it may be hard sometimes. Any last, one or two ideas before you go that you want parents to know?
I guess I would say that identity isn't something that you construct by yourself. You need other people to help you be who you are. So it's really important that we support people and that we recognize them. I mean, everybody wants to be, the glint in their parent's eye. You want to, that your parent is looking at you and seeing the beauty in you, and not that they're looking at you and you can see the disappointment in their eyes because you're not different than who you are. And, that's something that people don't forget, and it's hurtful and it lasts a long time. So people need to be loved and recognized, and if somehow you're still working at accepting your child's sexual orientation, and you're working it through, then try to find something, to just pin yourself on that you can really encourage and make them feel good about. Maybe they're a good student, or they're a beautiful artist or whatever, and work your way to to acceptance and support. And again, as Pashi says, maybe if not acceptance, then support.
Thank you. I want to thank you all. This has been a great conversation. I feel more grounded in this idea now. I just feel more at ease thinking about it with parents and partnering with parents about it. I want to let you all know that you can email us at info@peaceathomeparenting.com to get in touch with any of our presenters. I'm sure they'll be happy to hear from you, and we will be happy to hear from you and support you. Peace at Home experts can provide you with one-on-one coaching. We're building a library of classes for parents of LGBTQ kids, and we would love to hear from parents about what are those topics that you need most. Where are the places that you're struggling most? And I'll be looking to Colleen and Pashi and Barbara to help us think about what are the topics we should be looking at. And don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We love hearing from you. Pashi, Colleen, Barbara, thank you very much for your time today.